welcome back, and can we say Happy Thanksgiving? We maybe can. I
may have to edit that out. I don't know.
We are in the throes of the holiday, the fall, the harvest time, about to be crashing headlong into the holidays. And if we're talking about life and faith, we're talking about contending in this crazy world from the perspective of a by faith believer. And families, they can be tough.
Yeah.
You know, they can be easy to get along with, and sometimes those relationships are better than ever, you know, and they're just critical ones. I always like when I find it with grandparents and grandkids a lot, right? Like, I'm close with my grandfather, you know, closer now in my adult life than I was even as a kid, or, you know, you hear about those kinds of things. But families, you know, they don't choose each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so sometimes they can be a little tough. So it's definitely a big deal, and it was a big deal back in Bible times, and it's a big deal now, right? Because as we've said in previous podcasts, this Bible is as relevant today as it was back then, right?
I've heard people jokingly say that there are two times where it's unavoidable to live in the flesh rather than in the spirit, and that is in the morning before you've had your coffee, and number two, it's around the Thanksgiving table with all your relatives that push your buttons.
Yep, absolutely.
Not saying that I back that up, but it's a funny way of looking at it.
It's all tongue in cheek, but at the same time, you know, your family, you get to deal with them.
Yeah.
And with this podcast, we want to talk about how to contend with certain challenges you might have. So I thought it would be good at this time of the year to talk about a few tips to dealing with your family around the holidays. And I wrote down all my thoughts about this, and then I sort of organized them into a few different points. So
strap in, buckle up. No. No, it'll be good.
Before just to start it out on a positive note, do you, Josh, have any memorable experiences from the holidays with family, either the family you have now or as a kid or anything like that? How do you think about those times?
Yeah, around the holidays, just general watching. So for Thanksgiving, watching football games with my family was always a treat because I had. I'm gonna be careful here, but I have some family are louder than others, and you know, for better or for worse. But also to me, especially as a kid, I was like, man, like it's awesome watching football games over here. Like everybody's yelling at the TV, and like I just thought it was great. So there's that, and I don't know. There's super memorable things around that, but for sure in Christmas time. One special memory I think that sticks out in my mind is, man, I'm trying to remember how old I would have been. I was a teenager at some point. I don't know how old, but I remember at some point my aunt, who we are very close with in my family specifically, she had to be in the hospital for something on Christmas Day. So we had kind of already had like the gift opening stuff with the family, but there was all this other stuff we did with like extended family and all that later in the day. But shortly after that, when we got news of our aunt, my mom had to rush out, and she was gone for most of the day. And I just remember thinking about like it can be easy to say like, oh man, you know, like we had all these plans and it's kind of a bummer our mom's not here for Christmas. But she was coming back. We knew she'd be back that evening eventually, and it had also been a tiring day for her. She was worried about her sister for sure. And I remember my dad having the wherewithal to say, she's already had a rough day. And if you've ever had children in your home on Christmas Day, you'll understand like Christmas inevitably is just like you look at the house and it just gets destroyed.
Madness.
With all the new toys, all the gift wrapping everywhere. So it was really bad, I remember, and my dad was like, let's have this looking just immaculate by the time she gets home. And I don't know if it'd be interesting to hear my mom's take, like how immaculate was it, but we definitely gave it our best shot. And so we cleaned everything as best as we could, and I think she was relieved when she came home.
Yeah.
But specifically, I remember like my aunt ended up being okay. My mom was so thankful at the end, and my dad also, as a part to take the load off my mom's shoulders, was let's just go out to a nice restaurant and eat, so that she didn't even have to worry about cooking or anything like that. And so that actually started this new tradition that we had of always going out to a nice restaurant on Christmas evening. And that came to be one of my favorite traditions, but that's how it started. And I just remember like, it's kind of one of those like, rather than being absorbed in myself on Christmas Day and what I can get, it was that element of let's do something for our mom, something like that. So that was good.
What a great story.
Yeah.
I love that your memory is not about the stuff.
Yeah.
I love that your memory was not like, I got a PlayStation and it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, well, let me tell you about my second favorite movie. No.
I got this. Yeah. I think for us, as a kid, I remember it just being us and opening gifts on the morning. And I have a little brother that passed away when he was 18. And so I have a lot of memories around him.
Mm-hmm.
And, but all that to say, there are great memories to be had. And as we have talked about many times, there can be a lot of challenges in today's world, especially around the concept of being thankful and having, being grateful for what has been done for us. So a few tips to get along with your family during the holidays. I classified a few of these things into smaller categories. So the first point I want to make is that everyone is trying to figure out the world for themselves. So when you're in your family situation, try to see things from the perspective of others, especially those in previous generations. Their generation had some things figured out that your generation forgot.
That's good.
And your generation sees things that their generation missed.
Yeah.
So for them, they're just trying to hold on to what was good. Okay, the generation that came after yours grew up in a very different time.
Mm-hmm.
And they see things in new ways with the benefit of your generation's work, be it good or bad.
Yeah.
Even if you're from a family of Christians, the church in your grandmother's day is in many ways unrecognizable from your church.
Yeah.
And conversely, your church might be everything your grandparent hoped that the church would not be. Right? Contemporary music and a pastor without a tie can be a big deal for them.
Yeah.
So, in a discussion with family, when kind of the gloves come off a little bit, what's addressed in the word is what's important. And what's not addressed in the word directly is not as important.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is, you see that other generation and they maybe are critical of you or your situation, and you should just try to take that, try to have perspective and understand that while they don't understand some things about the way things are now, there are some things that they did have figured out that we forgot.
Yeah. Yeah, have a grace for that. It's hard, but yeah, you're right. That's good.
They can, if we get bogged down in those things, we can that's just a tip, right? It's just it's like try to see things, try to understand where they're coming from.
Yep. Now, so there's also an element to this that I think goes right along with what you're saying, Dan, where I know you yourself, you have made the decision to say, I don't want to be on Facebook, because of all the temptations that are there with getting involved in things I don't want to get involved with, just keeping your relationships. And I admire that. Like, I think that's good. If you look at platforms like Facebook right now, they're losing the younger audience. And when they poll people, they say the number one reason why they're leaving it is because, well, that's where my grandparents and my parents are. Like, I don't want to be on there and then watch. Because if you think about it, for those of you that are still on there with your parents and grandparents, you may not see them very often. But what's one time that you do see each other? Around the holidays, like we're talking about. Think about how much they're observing on your social media accounts, and they're just kind of stewing over for a little while, and they're finally like, they're holding on to it, and then finally they're like, well, they're right here. I should say something about it. And yeah, that's an unfortunate scenario.
For them, it means it's not just you. It's they might be looking at the loss of something that was better when they were our age.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back in my day, it was better. And conversely, they could be right.
Yeah.
They might be right about that.
Well, remember that question that you pitched to Doug in that one interview with him where you said, like, do you ever have to just, like, sit on yourself, so to speak? Because you're like, I know these things, but I'm observing it in my own family and coworkers, friends, all those things.
Yeah, and you have to choose your battles, I guess.
It's hard.
You know, wisely.
Yep.
Because
we've talked before about relational change. You need to have that, and if you don't have that, that's where problems come.
So we're called to be patient with one another. Right? Ephesians 4, walk in a manner worthy of the calling which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. We tolerate each other and we say, okay, we have this difference. This person is critical of my life, and maybe in the Christian circle, I say the Christian circle, but like people can be critical of what we do with ourselves and our time and how we choose to conduct our marriages or how we choose to conduct our life in church or what we will and won't accept as far as churches go. And, you know, it can cause division, but we're called to sort of look past all that. You know, to be patient means to bear a pain or a trial without complaint. And when you submit to the Spirit and His direction, He'll produce patience in you. It is a fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, or long-suffering.
Right.
So when we look at Ephesians, there's kind of a main thrust, right? It's like, in the first part, he says, in Him, we have, this is chapter 1, verse 7. In Him we have redemption through His blood, forgiveness of our trespasses according to the riches of His grace, which He lavished on us. He goes on to say, we were sealed with Him in the Holy Spirit, which was given to us as a pledge of our inheritance. He says, remember that at that time you were separated from Him, excluded, strangers to the promise, without hope, without God. But now you're brought near.
Yeah.
You're not strangers or aliens. Right? You're brought near by the blood. So then he gets to chapter 4, and he says, essentially, in light of that, in light of the fact that you've been saved by the blood, and you were separated but now brought near, how should you respond to that? Chapter 4, very first part of chapter 4, he says, with all humility and gentleness and patience, showing tolerance to one another, walk in a manner worthy of the calling. Preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And we do that by focusing on Him and what's been done for you. Right? Empathy is not just a feeling. It sometimes requires a tangible action.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be a part of a family get-together.
Mm-hmm.
We get there, and someone brings up a criticism of us in our life. So we stop, and we think before we react. We ponder him and what's been done for us. We look at that person, and in that moment, we remember what's been done for us, and we remember the second point I want to make, which is that relationships are more important than retrospection.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be heard.
Yeah. Or understood. Yeah.
We say in our family a lot, more often than I'd like to say it. Just because someone throws you a ball doesn't mean you have to catch it.
Yeah. Even though that's really tempting to catch that ball and throw it back,
The enemy prowls around waiting to devour you.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, how he does that is by stirring up petty disagreements.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's what these things sometimes can be. Not to say that every disagreement is petty, but a lot of them, a large percentage of them are like they're petty disagreements that don't really amount to much, right?
Mm-hmm.
How we feel about, certain topics is important, but if it's going to come at the cost of the relationship, that's not the Lord's will for our life.
Right.
He's not looking for us to have petty disagreements. He says it a million times in a million different ways.
Yeah. And one thing to consider too is, especially if you have family member that is not isn't saved, has not the term escapes me, that you're a by faith believer. If they're not a by faith believer, you can almost view it as like maybe they're trying to see what you're all about. Like they know maybe that you're a Christian, and they want to see, like, if I push this button, will it ruffle their feathers? Like, are they really that different from me? That can, and sometimes that can be not a conscious decision that they make, but a subconscious thing. They're just trying to test you and see. So that puts a lot more emphasis on family get-togethers in that sense too, because you're a testimony of what God has done in your life, and that can be challenging.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's a lot of pressure on a person to have the right to represent every Christian everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to actually talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Ephesians 4, in your anger, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger and give the devil a foothold.
Mm.
Now, some people think that means that you must settle every argument before you go to bed.
You'll have a lot of sleepless nights if that's the case.
And I know marriages where people say that's how we do things. We don't go to bed angry.
Mm-hmm.
But what it means is don't allow anger to consume you.
Yes. Yep.
Don't let that anger last even to the rest of the day.
As short as possible. That's really what it's driving at.
Right? It's not saying to be angry is a sin. It's not saying that.
Yep.
It's saying don't be so consumed by anger that the fact that this didn't go right bothers you so badly that you'll sacrifice that relationship. And that is what social media is all about, not to get down that road. Mm-hmm. But it's like, be angry.
Sin not.
And oh my goodness, you should have been angry yesterday.
Yeah.
You're late. You're late to the party. You got to be angry now for all these reasons. I don't mean to go into that. But what I'm saying is, don't let the sun go down in your anger is just saying deprioritize retrospection and saying, remember that time when I went to Grandma's house and she said the thing about church and I said,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We baptize people this way.
Yeah. Some people have a hard time letting go of anger just because they feel like I can't let go of my anger until I get an apology or I see something resolved in the situation. That is not the goal for Christians, is to, I'm waiting for this to happen before I let go of my anger. Like, no, that anger is only going to fester in you and hurt you. So letting go of it, I think, is God's will for our lives.
Well, when you look at the word when you look at especially the New Testament, and you look at it from kind of back away the 10,000-foot view, if you will, it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
And how we treat others and how we treat the lost and the hurting and the broken, right? And really the whole Bible is about that. But I'm just saying, when we're talking about these specific directions given to us by New Testament writers, it's often about treat others with this kind of behavior.
Love
with
your neighbor as
humility,
yourself.
with, you know, and
Yeah.
there are so many different verses that I had a hard time narrowing down to the specific ones that I want to say. So I'm bound to leave a few on the table, you know.
Sure, yeah.
Do everything in prayer before you get into those situations. You know, just if you're in the car beforehand,
Yeah.
and it's
good.
like, Lord, help me appreciate, help me be thankful for what's been done for me before I go. Because you know, there's some certain family members you're just gonna you might have problems with. You know, remind yourself of what you're thankful for and what you appreciate in life before going in that situation. Because anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't say don't be angry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It says anger is not profitable in that way.
Yeah. Anger is a part of life, but it shouldn't be a permanent thing, right?
Right. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be at the like I say, it always comes back to at the cost of that relationship.
Yeah. Anger, in a way, is kind of like another thing in the Bible that talks about it, like lust. Lust is something that's going to come after everybody, but you don't have to hold on to it. You need to let it be a passing thought. Guard your thoughts. Same with anger. When anger comes in, it's going to come. It's unavoidable. But what you do with it, giving it to the Lord, praying like you're saying beforehand and afterwards, that's huge.
Big. Yeah. Someone might not understand your choices, and you don't need to explain yourself to everyone.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point.
Getting along with someone is not the same as forgiving them.
Yeah. Yep.
We can be there for each other without surrendering our dignity or misrepresenting our place or position in a given situation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't have to be right. You don't have to be heard.
Yep.
We can get along and we can keep the peace without being right about a specific situation.
Yeah, you can easily fret, I think, over this person did not hear me, or like they didn't understand what I was getting at. I need my point to, but
And what if I had to live the rest of my life without that person understanding it?
yeah, that goes through your mind, right?
Yeah, you know?
But it's chasing the wind sometimes.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And now remember that for yourself too,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Someone else can get along with you without understanding or agreeing with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, so you get what I mean? It's like, beware when you're, maybe badgering somebody too much, or,
Yes.
it's like you could be the aggressor in that situation if you're not thinking about it, especially again, like with the way we have this reaction culture kind of thing, it's like, oh, if I don't comment on this post,
Yeah.
how will I be able to live with myself if I don't stand up for this, obscure issue okay.
Yeah.
As far as it depends on you, live at peace with people.
Yeah.
So I think that does mean letting go of certain things, letting go of being able to look back and say a thing went a certain way.
Yeah, that verse specifically calls a good point because can you say that verse again?
As far as it depends upon you, live at peace with people.
Yes. It is not, you can't say I cannot be at peace because there's this unresolved, unfixed issue over here with this person over here. You, as it pertains to you, you can choose to be at peace with another person even when they're not choosing to be at peace with you. And in fact, sometimes that's how it starts. If you're ever going to get both sides, one person has to step up to the plate and say, I'm going to choose to live my days in peace with this. Even though it was very hurtful, this has wounded me. You don't live in the hurt. You don't stay in the woundedness. You say, by God's grace, I'm going to live in the peace over here. That's huge.
And biblical forgiveness can take place at a later time
Right. Yep.
when the time comes, but do your part to keep the peace and just, I mean, it's, you can't change other people,
Mm-hmm.
but you can do something in this situation to appreciate what's been done for you and live at peace with others. I mean,
Yeah.
if it wasn't possible, he wouldn't have put it in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely possible to have peace. Now, that doesn't mean that you can, like I say, you can't, other people are not, other people have thoughts and actions of their own. You can't control those things, but, you can control how you respond.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on where you disagree, lean on other people and be there for them in return.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh, Double down on your common ground,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
If
It's huge.
you love sports and this other person, or let's say the other person loves sports and you kind of like sports, when you get together, figure out what they like and double down on that thing and say, like, okay, I watch a few games or something, right? It's like,
Yeah.
that's just a small example, but if you can find something, say it's music or something like that, and even if it's like you're uniting on something you don't like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't stand this or that song or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
double down on those things, because those common ground things will grow, and you'll have those between you, and you can build on those for
Yeah.
later times. So when the disagreements come, you have that rapport build
Yep.
in this other
Absolutely.
area, so you can say, like, well, we like each other for this reason or that. I'm a firm believer that people that you don't like or people you don't get along with, if you really know where they're coming from,
Mm-hmm.
you will like them.
Yep. Walk a
Because
mile in their shoes.
Walk a mile in their shoes. I do
Yep.
believe that's true. I haven't thought to see if it's in the word somewhere, but I do feel that there is a commonality when somebody didn't just come out of the box the way they are.
Yeah. If you understand a little bit where they're coming from, oftentimes you find out information about people and you're like, man, that makes so much sense as to like what happened. Like maybe you had a blow up with a person. You're like, well, I didn't even know what this was going on in their life at that time. And you realize I was just caught in the crossfire. It was nothing personal. Yeah.
So you can find something about that person that you have commonality with. Another thing you can try is to make new traditions, right? You talked about that, okay, we cleaned the place up. We found a place to eat to relieve this person of their stress. A year
Mm-hmm.
later, that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
Aunt's out of the hospital, and yet
Right.
you still did this because now you have this new tradition.
Mm-hmm. And our aunt came with us that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Make new traditions and remember those old traditions and what made them great.
Mm.
We used to have a tradition in my family, which kind of ended when my grandma passed away, but well, I guess we've kind of done it a little bit here and there, but we used to have a tradition where Christmas Eve was Christmas for our family, and then Christmas morning families were in our own homes. But wow, that was such a great tradition that we had. My wife and I have a tradition now at the end of the fall where we go to Bronner's in Frankenmuth and do the Christmas, bang out some Christmas afternoon, an afternoon of Christmas enjoyment. Those traditions are cool, and traditions can be great. Sometimes it's like those are the things that bring about the most anxiety, because that's when the family gets together and that's when we have to kind of contend with each other. But that's what the point of this message today is about, is just finding a way to navigate those situations from the perspective of a by-faith believer.
Yeah. Sometimes contentions at family get-togethers comes because there's just not enough going on to do for everybody. So, like, it's that age-old thing, like, you're just sitting around twiddling your thumbs. You're just asking for something to go wrong. You have more activities for people to get involved in, things like that, traditions to do. It takes the focus off of your nitpickiness with each other, and it puts it on like having a common thing that you're all participating in and doing together, having fun.
Yeah,
hopefully.
appreciating each other. Yeah, even if it's just the guys standing around the grill, or the the wives taking a trip together, or the ladies taking a trip together, or something like that. And and I think we watched football a little bit, but I don't know that we really did that. But I remember all the ladies would always be putting the meal together.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know what was said during those times because I was pretty young, but I know it must have been good, right? Because we did it every year. So I can imagine, you imagine those sort of Norman Rockwell type situations where everything is perfect and all that stuff. And maybe it has its challenges, but those kinds of things are things you'll remember,
Yeah.
So an attitude of gratitude goes a long way.
Oh, you have that in your notes too?
Yeah, I did. And
Wow,
I was like
that's
smiling
great.
when you mentioned that in the other podcast. Pride can be kind of a double-edged sword here, right? And
Yes.
And so, like I say, thinking that you need to be right, it can be like a negative.
Yeah, pride is so deceptive, but the Bible says it's at the root of every. You may think, well, it's at the root of this issue with this other person because this other person is prideful. But man, you got to check yourself because we can be so easily deceived by our own pride. We think, I don't have any pride. This person's way more prideful, but it's all. I would wager because of what the Bible says about it that every time there's contention between you and you've let pride creep in there at some point to some degree.
Well, you feel a sense of responsibility to maybe yourself, or maybe even like if you're a Christian and like you had mentioned earlier, to somebody who is not a Christian in your family who maybe is testing you either willingly or otherwise. You might feel that you need to be right or you need to be heard, but you don't represent all the Christians of the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even if someone thinks you do.
Yep. Yeah, you don't have it all figured out, and maybe you would say that. I don't know anybody who would say I have it all figured out, but are your actions towards others, would that communicate that you believe that you have it all figured out? That's tough.
Yeah, and do you, and furthermore, you don't owe anybody an answer to that.
Right.
You're not the elected official sent from the state of whatever state you're in to represent all the Christians
authority invested in me
by the authority vested in you and from all the churches that have ever existed in time. Because that's what sometimes people do think, like, this is the Christian I know, this is how that Christian acts, so all Christians must act that way.
Yeah, that's rough. Yeah.
And that's it's sad that it is that way, but that doesn't add pressure to you to behave.
Right.
That's not
right.
You're not. It's not actually true, and it's the Lord's problem. Let Him deal with it.
Yeah,
you don't need to
let God reveal that.
Yeah, you don't need to expend that relationship, or you don't need to take a bullet.
Yeah, it's something to be mindful of, but not anxious about. Don't let it cause anxiety.
Right. Be anxious for how many things?
Nothing.
No things. Oh, no things. Be anxious for no things. Let's see here. Ultimately, your value as a person comes from God's assessment of Christ's sacrifice, not the opinions of others.
Oh, that's good.
I have been offended at this time by this person who said this thing about Christians, and you might feel an obligation to represent. But you don't actually need to do that because your value, your worth, was measured at the cross.
Yeah, and think about this. God does not need any of us Christians to defend Him or His truth. God is true no matter whether they acknowledge it or not. It's not our mission. Our mission is to spread the gospel, right? But our mission is not to convince people of the truth necessarily.
Yeah, you don't have to convince, you don't have to have literally every right thing for every right situation. And just because you're the only Christian they know, or just because they're putting the squeeze to you in that moment, doesn't mean that they throw that ball, doesn't mean you need to catch it.
Right.
You are, as the song says, holy, righteous, redeemed. Right? You are not the person that you were in the past. Right?
Yep. Dear younger me.
It's not your responsibility to solve problems. And here's the one I really love. 360 days out of the year, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Because a lot of times these situations with these difficult family members are only around the holidays. Because maybe that's the only time you see them.
Yeah. And it won't be forever either, because they're not going to be around forever.
Right. It might be
Might be shorter than you think.
might be shorter than you think, and maybe you can come at it with an attitude of like, I'm gonna take the time I have to be near this person and make it a positive experience, and just not let those things bother me if you can. I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this has got me thinking, because what I wouldn't give to have, one more holiday down in Texas with, granted, I don't have like a lot of like the people I was closest to outside of my immediate family that I grew up in, right? Outside of my immediate family. And even then, like, I don't get to spend the holidays with them much anymore, if at all. Especially my sister who lives out in California. That would be great in and of itself, just to spend one more Christmas with that immediate family. But even if we're talking about like what I grew up in with the extended family, I don't have any grandparents left alive anymore. And outside of my family, my aunt, who I mentioned earlier in this episode, she was like almost like a second mom. I was so close with her. Like, we went on family vacation, she would go with us. She's no longer with us anymore. She's passed on as well. But even though I'm not as close with all the rest of my family, like, I would love to just be able to get together one more time. Doesn't matter what we talked about or what went on. It would just be nice. You just the perspective now, things I took for granted because it just happened every year. You think about now and you miss it.
Definitely.
So, for sure.
Can't go back though.
Yeah.
Can't go back.
Be thankful for the time that you had.
Yep.
And if the Lord presents opportunity in the future, praise God. But make the memories with the family that you have right now. The children in my home, for example, maybe you can relate to this as a listener. You have children in your home right now. Treasure every, because you will look back at some point and say, man, like, all those things will creep in too. But just make the best of it right now. Maximize it. Use it for the Lord. Ask God to help you there. Yeah.
When we think about the process of ignoring a challenge, or when somebody is difficult to deal with, one way that you can defuse the situation is just to concede early. Be the first to concede. A lot of times a person who's difficult like that just wants to be heard. So if you just hear them without challenging it or try to spin it into a positive thing, then you can defuse a lot of that, right?
What's a quick expression, Dan, that you can use when somebody's telling you something?
What are you going for?
I'm thinking like, oh, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Like, even if you totally disagree with what they're saying. Oh, that's really interesting.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Those are words. No, don't say that. But yeah.
Well, I like what you're saying there.
Yeah, I can see how some people think that way. No.
My wife apologizes that way sometimes. She'll say, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I go, wait, what do you mean?
That's so great, yeah.
Be the first to concede, and if somebody is criticizing you or your life, and you have something that you need to change, concede. It diffuses it. You know what? I'm working on that.
Yeah.
And praise the Lord, I'm not the way I was.
Yeah.
Every step of the way, every day I get a little better, ideally. But it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, just say like, well, that's something I'm working on. Something,
Have you seen that classic Seinfeld episode where they go into a party or something, but they try to go in with a game plan like, hey, if you see me like giving the sign, come over and save me out of this conversation. Like, they do this ridiculous like patting on the top of the head. So the joke is they both get stuck in conversations simultaneously, and they're both over there like whacking themselves in the head, like come say, but they can't because they're both trapped.
Yeah, and as an aside, just because sometimes this stuff does kind of revolve around political opinions, and it doesn't segue much from the Seinfeld thing, but I'm doing my best here.
Yeah.
As an aside, a lot of this comes from political opinions, but a political, and that's so on the lips of everybody now because of everything that's going on in the world, which is just like a whole other episode.
Things are very polarized.
Yeah, as they say, political opinions are kind of in a fisheye lens, right? They're for a time, they're not forever.
Mm-hmm.
And on a long enough timeline, you get perspective. So plead ignorance on issues if you're not super passionate about it when politics comes up in the family. This is, again, coming back to the topic of relationships being more important than retrospection. But think back to past arguments that you had already and how they have amounted to nothing. Right? You didn't change that person's opinion. All they did was dislike you more, and all you did was dislike them more. It seemed huge when it was happening, but before it wasn't very big, and since it's not been very big. But in the moment, it was huge, and you thought it was the only thing that mattered, right? Fisheye lens, very small on one side, very big in the middle, very small on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And that's the way a lot of this political stuff goes.
Mm-hmm. I'm chuckling a little bit because I just heard somebody recently on a video. They said something like, because somebody made the argument that, you're not going to convince anybody of anything over the internet. It's unprofitable. And they're like, no, actually, I have. And in fact, when people say you have changed my mind on this topic, I save it into a file. I have a file folder of people telling me that I've changed their mind over the internet. I'm like, wow.
This is a treasure trove of gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so, if those past arguments have amounted to nothing, then deprioritize the results of the current argument you're in.
Yeah.
If you know in the past you haven't changed that person's heart, then understand that you're probably not going to now, and don't let it...
You do this every year. Like, come on.
Above all, Ephesians 4 again, only say what is good for edification according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear.
That's good.
Right? It's like we were just talking about. You said it as a joke, but like, what are some reactions you can have? That's interesting. Those are words.
Yeah.
Only say what is good for edification according to the need of the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that it will give grace to those who hear.
Yeah. Respond. Let them know like you're listening to them. Don't give them the cold shoulder, but you don't have to engage in a dialogue. You don't have to feed it. Yeah.
Which brings me to my third point. So the first two. Everyone's trying to figure out the world for themselves. Relationships are more important than retrospection. The last point I want to make, set realistic expectations. Some people will listen and change. And you put them in a file on your computer. Because there it's a rarity.
Yeah, that
but
is
no,
a rarity.
some people will hear a point and concede it and change.
Mm-hmm.
Then, so sometimes it is good to talk about things.
And it's one thing to change a person's mind. It's another thing to change like how they act, how they live, those things. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's not not that it's never profitable.
Right.
But it's often not profitable.
It takes wisdom and discernment to know when to go there. What, like I think you said earlier, like you need to be careful about picking your battles.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people will change only when they think it's their idea.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll say something, and then 5 years later, they'll say, "You know what I was thinking the other day? This thing that and you're like, I told you that 5 years ago."
Yeah. Yep.
So they might change someday.
Even then, in that situation, you could take solace in knowing that, yeah, they may not ever acknowledge that you told them that, but say, you know what, praise God, I planted the seed. Somebody else probably watered that seed, and eventually God worked on them. Yeah.
Some people will change slowly over time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and some people will never change,
Yeah.
you know. As Christians, we're called to love our enemies, right? God demonstrated his love for us, and that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. We are called to value others more than ourselves. So try to understand where the other person's coming from. Sometimes people realize that this is the only opportunity they'll have to talk to you, and they might feel like now is the time to get that point across, or to do the best they can for that purpose. So recognize when someone's trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're motivated for reasons that you don't totally understand. So they'll say and do things that don't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Bless their heart.
Bless their heart. Colossians 3, as those who have been chosen, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another, forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you.
Yeah.
Let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful.
Yeah. I think you just took it from what I said, bless your heart, to being more than a saying, and literally do your best to be a blessing to those people. Yeah. Which is the sentiment behind that saying. I don't know if it's always used that way, because sometimes it's used sarcastically, but it should be, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Those of us here want you and your family. Okay, Josh and I want to say we hope you have an amazing and blessed holiday full of love and joy and peace and patience.
Yes.
And kindness and goodness and faithfulness, with gentleness and, if you must, self-control.
Yeah.
You know, which is all accomplished not by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, but by focusing on him, by his leading, and appreciating what's been done for you, which is everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything.
So we hope this helps you, and we hope you have an amazing Thanksgiving and an amazing holiday season, and that it's countercultural to the world, and it is something that you appreciate, and you know what I mean, and it's just full of good positive things and positive growth and positive.
Yeah, it is our prayer. We'll pray for you, the listener, that maybe you're going into a season where it is difficult with your family. We'll pray for you, but definitely you make it a matter of prayer. Ask God to help you to see your relatives through his eyes. That'll make all the difference. So yeah, happy Thanksgiving. We appreciate you guys as the listeners. We hope that you make it through that seemingly minefield experience but we hope that it goes better than you ever thought it could, for sure.
Absolutely. You've been listening to the Life and Faith podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Stay up to date on all our episodes, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast.